So today we would be creating our first React app. There are some prerequisites. You should have at least basic knowledge of HTML, CSS and JavaScript. You should have Node installed on your device. Yarn is totally optional. I prefer Yarn because it is a better package manager in my perspective. And any idea of your choice, Sublime, Atom. I usually use VS Code. So I have linked all three of them in the prerequisite section of the blog I have written. The link is in the bio. Okay, so details, not bio. Okay, so we can go about this in two ways. Either we can have uh, create React app from npx, which would create a default app, or we can just go about making a completely empty folder and just start from there. So first I'll show how a default this npx create app looks like. I've already created it with the name my app. So this is the basic code. There's just a div and a rotating image. We'll just start the server while I explain the code. So, and a rotating image in the middle, and there's some text that is written over here, and that's it. This is the default React app, and let's see what it looks like. So that's it. Just like I said, a rotating picture and just some text. We can just edit it here and save, and it would re-render here. Yeah, so that's it. So we would be creating a completely empty folder and we would start from that. This was just to show that what a default app looks like. So mkdir first react cd first react. First we would need to initialize the folder with npm in it. This would make a package.json file which would contain all the details of your project. So first React version 1.1, this is a React app. Entry point would be source slash app.js. We would be creating this later. Test command, we don't have any. Keywords, author, me, of course. Lol. So yeah, so now we would add the basic three packages that we need. We would need obviously React. We would need the React data object model, which is React DOM, React DOM, and we would need a bundler. We can use Parcel or React Script. I usually use React Script. I used to use Parcel earlier. So, and React scripts. So after the packages are installed, you just jump into our Visual Studio. See, we just have a package.json, a yarn log file, and the node modules that we just installed. Now, we would need two files, a minimum of two files, which one would be containing the components that we would create. It would be the JavaScript file, and one would be our HTML file in which we would render our components. So for static stuff like the favicon, the manifest.json, or index.html, which is also the static one, we would create a public folder, public, and we would add our index.html inside that folder. We need a very basic HTML document. I would just create a div and give it a ID of root. We would render our components inside this division, and anything that is written inside this division would automatically be overridden when we would render our components. So I can just write not rendered, which would signify that the app is not rendered as of now. So that's it. That's all we need in our index.html. Now we would create our app.js. we usually add all our components and all the other stuff that is not static inside a src folder. So let's create a src folder, and inside that we would create a app.js. So for a React application, you all obviously need React. So let's import that. Import React from React. And we also need the render function from React DOM, which we would also import. Import render from React DOM. And that's it. That's all the imports that we need. So there are two types of components that we can create. One is a class component, which inherits from a class known as component, which already exists in React. And the other is functional component. I personally use functional component because when I started learning React, I started with React version 5. Until then, hooks already became a stable API, and it was relatively easier to work with functional components. But we would be creating both types of components in this tutorial. So let's just create a class component first. Class, what should we name it? App class, which extends react.component. So now, because it is inheriting from react.component, it now has a function known as render. Now, this whenever we call this component, the component would automatically render whatever the render function returns. So let's just return whatever we want to render. So let's just return a h1 component containing hello world, and that's it. That's our first type of component, a class component. And the second type of component, we can either use a arrow function or a normal function. That's totally like dependent on whoever is coding. I personally use arrow functions a lot. So let's just create an arrow function known as app function. And just like the above component, whatever this function returns, it would render when we call it. So let's just return something. Same h1 containing a hello world. Hmm. And that's it. Now we have created both of our components, but we would need to render it somewhere. We just have components and literally no use for them. So now we would we would use the render function that we called from React DOM render. So the basic syntax of render function is whatever you wanna uh, render inside. So we would first be rendering app class, and where do you want to render it? So document dot get element by id. So we created a div element with id root. So let's just add root here, and that's it. This should render now. So I forgot to copy this scripts earlier. So what these scripts do is they basically give you a shortcut that you can use with yarn or npm. Instead of writing the whole React script start, you can just write yarn start or npm start, and it would run this script. This is relatively more helpful when you're using a bigger command like a cross env or something. So that's it. And I just realized that React scripts also needs the file to be named index.js, not app.js. So I renamed the app.js to index.js. And let's just start the application now. Yarn start. Our app is rendered successfully, and we have rendered the class component as of now. Let's just check if it is working. This is a class component, and let's save it, and I'll just refresh it, and yep, this is a class component. And just like this, we can also render our functional component, app function, and let's see what that looks like. Hello world, and you can write anything you want, like this is a functional component or something, functional component. And you can also add other components inside this. So let's just add app class inside this, and I'll just reload, and voila, both of them are printed. So that's it for today's tutorial, I guess. There's nothing else. We have successfully created our first React app, a very basic one though, and we can just create as many components as we want, like a nav bar or like anything, a footer, and we can just add that component here. This just removes the clutter, and we have not done states and all yet, so we are just at basic rendering right now. So yeah, that's it. Consider subscribing, and thank you for watching this video.